Every cell in the human body operates as a microscopic engine. As these metabolic processes run, they generate a continuous, inevitable byproduct, intense internal heat. To maintain physiological homeostasis and avoid fatal hyperthermia, the body must continuously shed this accumulating thermal energy into the external environment. Physical laws dictate that heat only flows passively in one direction, down a thermal gradient, moving from areas of high heat to areas of lower heat. The clinical text explicitly states that heat is lost from the body only when the environmental temperature is strictly lower than the internal body temperature. A fraction of this internal heat vents through minor anatomical pathways, including the respiratory system, the kidneys, and the GI tract. However, those internal systems are highly specialized and lack the vast exposed surface area required for massive thermal exchange. That specific functional role belongs almost entirely to the external layer of the skin. Because the skin serves as the primary physical boundary between internal biology and the surrounding environment, analyzing mammalian temperature regulation requires mapping exactly how thermal energy bridges that gap. The skin sheds thermal energy into physical space through three specific, non-evaporative physical vectors. For a human resting in a room temperature environment, the dominant mechanism of heat loss is not sweating, it is radiation. Looking at a centralized thermal model of a resting human, a full 60% of the body's total heat loss radiates invisibly outward from the skin into the surrounding space. The source data confirms this, placing radiation at the top of the thermal hierarchy at 60%. It defines this mechanism as a direct transfer of heat via infrared electromagnetic radiation, thermal energy freely propagating through empty air to nearby cooler objects. Trailing radiation is a secondary, highly active form of physical heat transfer, convection. Adding convection to the model introduces fluid dynamics. Moving air currents constantly sweep past the skin, carrying away an additional 15% of metabolic heat. Returning to the clinical breakdown, the 15% figure is verified. The process operates in two steps. Thermal energy is conducted to the microscopic boundary layer of air surrounding the skin and is then physically stripped away by moving air currents. The final and smallest, non-evaporative vector is conduction. Updating our model to include a seated posture, a highly localized thermal transfer occurs right at the point of contact, accounting for just 3% of total heat loss. The text confirms this low output, specifically noting it occurs when touching solid objects like a chair or a bed. Unlike radiation, which travels through empty air, conduction requires rigid, direct physical contact between the skin and a cooler solid surface. Adding these three vectors together accounts for 78% of our thermal budget. Passive thermodynamics, rather than active physiological work, carry the vast majority of the burden when keeping a resting human cool. The remaining 22% of the thermal budget is handled entirely by an active phase change, evaporation. Even without heavy sweating, humans constantly undergo insensible perspiration, the continuous, unnoticeable evaporation of water directly through the skin layers and the respiratory tract. But dermal evaporation relies on millions of specialized glands distributed across the skin. When a mammalian species lacks sweat glands entirely, it faces a severe anatomical constraint. Canines are the primary example of an animal operating with this exact physiological limitation. To shed massive amounts of heat without sweating, dogs utilize an active behavioral workaround called panting. The physiological literature details the mechanics of panting explicitly. It relies on rapid, shallow breathing paired with the deliberate secretion of excess saliva. The text confirms the physical driver remains identical. Heat is ultimately lost through the evaporation of that saliva. Placing the human and canine models side by side reveals two drastically different anatomical strategies executing the exact same job. The human utilizes passive, microscopic water vapor release across the entire body, while the canine forces rapid airflow over concentrated liquid in the respiratory tract. Both achieve identical phase change cooling. Whether deployed passively through human skin or actively through canine respiration, evaporative cooling serves as the universal biological fallback. When environmental temperatures rise and passive radiation or convection stall, liquid water absorbs the thermal excess and carries it away. These physical effectors, the skin, the sweat glands, the respiratory tract, do not operate independently. They require a centralized neural controller to trigger them. The mammalian body actively defends a specific targeted internal temperature known as the physiological set point. This source identifies both the controller and the precise target. The hypothalamus regulates the body to enforce a strict set point of 37 degrees Celsius. Situated deep within the brain, the hypothalamus functions as a continuously running master thermostat. Zooming into the internal architecture, the precise locus responsible for initiating these specific cooling procedures is isolated in a small node, the anterior hypothalamus. The clinical breakdown corroborates this specific anatomy, labeling the anterior hypothalamus, also known as the preoptic area, directly as the heat loss center. This preoptic area serves as an aggregated data hub. It constantly receives real-time temperature inputs from the blood flowing through it and from peripheral receptors mapped across the skin. The moment that incoming data indicates a core temperature climbing above the 37-degree threshold, the preoptic area triggers an immediate systemic physical response. A mammalian body temperature is a rigidly enforced internal metric. It is dictated entirely by a dedicated, highly specialized neural node, firing commands the instant the internal environment drifts off target. Connecting this centralized neural architecture to the physical surface of the skin creates a complete, integrated thermal feedback loop. Visualizing the entire system in motion, the anterior hypothalamus processes a heat spike and immediately fires neural signals straight down to the vascular networks in the skin. This dilates the vessels to instantly maximize the 60% radiative loss, the 15% convective loss, and the 3% conductive loss. The precise sequence operates like clockwork. The anterior hypothalamus detects a deviation above 37 degrees Celsius. It routes electrical impulses outward to the peripheral effector organs. Those organs execute the physical mandates, engorging the skin with warm blood to rapidly push infrared radiation and convective exchange out into the cooler air. By seamlessly translating neurological impulses into the strict physics of thermodynamics, the mammalian body sheds its metabolic exhaust. It defends its core set point against a constantly fluctuating external environment, ensuring its own survival.